Let's talk about serotonin. What is it and why is it important?
Serotonin is hugely important for many different functions in the brain, but for happiness, for flexibility, and respect. And respect's the ones that fools people. But when your serotonin levels are low, you more easily feel disrespected. And if you have a social fight or you feel diminished in some way, your serotonin levels drop. And when serotonin levels go low, people tend to worry. They get stuck on negative thoughts, negative behaviors. They tend to be argumentative and oppositional. And if things don't go their way, they get upset, which on the surface can appear selfish, but it's really not selfish, it's rigid. And boosting serotonin with like bright light therapy, which is why it's so important to get sunshine. And while, as we go into the holidays, time change happens just at the wrong time, right? As we get less sunlight and it gets colder outside, we just, then got a bomb dropped on us. Like all of a sudden you lose an hour a day of light. And light is so important.
Let me back us up a second. So does your brain create serotonin? Is that what is the function of serotonin in the brain?
So your gut makes about 90% of the serotonin in your body, but it doesn't go directly into your brain. Your brain creates serotonin from the amino acid precursor called tryptophan. And that's why often eating tryptophan-rich foods,
like turkey,
can be helpful, but not in a ketogenic way. You have to eat tryptophan-rich foods with a carbohydrate because you need an insulin response to drive tryptophan into the brain. So turkey and sweet potatoes together is a great combination to boost your mood.
So when you have high levels of serotonin, how does that impact you?
Well, you tend to be happy. You're a little bit less motivated. You sort of don't care that much. I remember when Prozac first came on to the market, and I would give it to some of my depressed patients, and they would say they would be less depressed, but also less motivated. Because as tryptophan goes up, dopamine, another chemical we should talk about, goes down. They have this sort of counterbalancing effect, which is why, and this is really interesting for anyone who grew up in an alcoholic home. I studied children and grandchildren of alcoholics. They often have low levels of both serotonin and dopamine. And so if I just raise one, I make them better in some ways, but worse in other ways. So a lot of people who take SSRIs, they go, well, I'm happier, but I don't really care that much. I had one guy tell me he wasn't doing his taxes, and he's like, no, this is going to be a problem. So I had to rebalance his medication.
So is serotonin sort of the happiness one and dopamine is the motivation and drive one? Is that their relationship?
Well, they're both. You think of both of them involved in happiness. And dopamine is the molecule of more. It's when you get dopamine, you go, oh, I like that. And the problem is the more you get, the more you want. And then it turns into trouble. We are wearing out our dopamine centers in the brain in our society with our phones and social media and the nonstop video games and texting. It's we're being thrilled to death, which ultimately wears out the pleasure centers in the brain. So you have to be very careful. I often talk to people about drip dopamine, don't dump it.
What does that mean? Drip dopamine, don't dump it.
So you want little tiny little tiny bursts of dopamine, not a big splash. So for example, cocaine, big splash of dopamine and you go, whoa. But the problem is you have none left and then you get depressed, which you then start using. Alcohol is the same way. Alcohol dumps dopamine. Nicotine, vaping dumps dopamine. Scary movies dump dopamine. Falling in love dumps dopamine. You want to drip it, holding Tana's hand, getting eye contact, looking for what I call the micro moments of happiness. So much more important. And new love is totally dumping dopamine. So you always, whenever you just fall in love, you need to whoa, this is really awesome. Let me ride this out before I make any big decisions.
So would an example of dripping dopamine include the 2 micro habits you talked about? One being waking up in the morning and saying, I'm going to make it a great day. How am I going to do that? And also at the end of the day, going on that treasure hunt for what went right?
Yes.
Excellent. How can you tell if you have low dopamine?
If you're tired, if you find that you're unmotivated, if you're sad, and you just don't have the motivation to get done what you want to get done. And, I'm in Justin Bieber's docuseries Seasons. And, I've been his doctor for a long time. And they just wore that boy's dopamine centers out. And then, when you become famous like that, you have access to women, to drugs, to video games, and just completely, almost killed that boy. And they deadened his pleasure centers. But the good news is even if you've been bad to your brain, by doing the right things, your brain, we call it neuroplastic, it can be better, even in a matter of months.
Wow. We've talked about supplements. We've talked about some micro habits. What are 3 simple ways to increase dopamine?
Cold showers will do it. So I just took a shower before I did it. And I always finish with 2 minutes. I turn it all the way cold because cold therapy has been shown to increase both norepinephrine, another neurotransmitter, and dopamine. Eating tyrosine-rich foods. So we talked about tryptophan, the amino acid building block for serotonin. Tyrosine is the amino acid building block for dopamine. So things like almonds and eggs and beans and fish and chicken, dark chocolate. But you don't want to do that with an insulin response or with a carbohydrate. And so this is where a higher protein, lower carbohydrate diet can be helpful. Exercise also does it, and certain supplements like tyrosine. So tyrosine is a supplement, and it's the amino acid building block for dopamine.
So is there any certain times of day where your dopamine is higher or lower just naturally?
In the morning.
And is the same true as serotonin?
In the evening.
Okay. So to explain that to us, and then how we can use something natural to boost it.
So everybody's circadian rhythm or the rhythm of their energy is different. There are morning larks and night owls, and you sort of have to know what you are. A lot of my ADD patients are night owls, and society is sort of biased against them. Because school starts early, work starts early for a lot of people. But you just have to know your rhythm. And if your dopamine is high in the morning, that's when you want to focus and get work done. If it tends to be higher later in the day, know your rhythm. Serotonin often helps people sleep. And in our supplement, Put Me to Sleep, we actually have 5-HTP, which is the amino acid precursor, even closer to serotonin than tryptophan. And for a lot of people, it helps decrease worry and promote sleep.
Wow. I'm like slightly overwhelmed. I don't even know where to start in terms of like how to boost my serotonin naturally, how to boost my dopamine naturally. So is there a way to simplify this? Like, you just kind of talked about your circadian rhythm and understanding if you're a night owl or you're a morning person. So if you're a morning person and you kind of wake up and you're naturally more motivated, are there certain things you should do first thing in the morning to keep your dopamine levels high, to stay focused, to promote your brain health?
So one thing I really like, especially as we start into, later fall and winter, is morning bright light.
Okay.
And so people who have seasonal affective disorder, so winter blues, that morning bright light therapy, and you can actually get these therapy lamps. I make one called our Bright Minds therapy lamp, 10,000 lux. So it's bright.
Okay.
Put it, don't look at it, put it like an arm's length away from you while you're putting on your makeup or having breakfast, if you have breakfast, for 20 or 30 minutes in the morning. Super simple, can significantly improve dopamine, your energy, mood, and cognitive function. Exercise. Whether you want to increase serotonin or dopamine, it does both. Walk like you're late for 45 minutes, 4 or 5 times a week. Super simple, bright light, exercise, just incredibly helpful. And this is very important. I just turned 68 this year. And it's very clear to me that the stronger you are as you age, the less likely you are to get Alzheimer's disease. But it's really, for older people, it's frailty that kills them almost more than anything else. So light, exercise, simple supplements, and now you can eat in certain ways to boost the neurotransmitters in your brain.
So when you say frailty and strength, are you also recommending, in addition to the 30 to 40 minutes of walking as if you're late 3 or 4 times a week, that you also add in strength training?
You bet. I think it's absolutely critical for men and for women. Your muscles are your protein reserve. So one of my young doctors went to Hawaii on vacation and got this terrible infection that almost killed him.
Oh,
And
wow.
the reason he didn't die is he was strong when he went into that illness and had the protein reserve muscle on his body. And yeah, no, I remember the day when in the hospital, I expected I was going to get a call. He died in the middle of the night because he just got this wicked infection from jumping into a natural pool in Hawaii. But he survived and he's done great because it's the protein reserve or the brain reserve you bring into an illness or an accident that determines how you're going to do after it. I mean, you've probably, seen, one person gets into a car accident and they come out of it just fine. Another one's permanently damaged. Same accident. Why? Because it's the level of brain health or
Hmm.
brain reserve they brought into the accident that often determines the outcome. So every single day of your life, from my perspective, every single day of your life, you should be boosting your brain reserve.
Well, that's what I find to be so inspiring and empowering about your work, your research, your message. Dr. Amen, and all the content that, goes crazy viral on TikTok and everywhere else is that your message is one of optimism and self-empowerment, because you are very clear that there are simple things that we can do to train our brains, to make our brains healthier, and that has an enormous impact on the quality of our lives. And so it's not too late for anybody listening to improve their brain health doing these simple things. Can we talk quickly about cortisol, like what it is, why it matters to kind of understand what it is when it comes to your brain health?
So cortisol is critical. It's made by your adrenal glands, and it helps us manage stress and deal with inflammation. When it's really low, people have something called Addison's disease, and they can get deathly sick. But when it's high, because of chronic stress, chronic negativity, that it actually puts fat on your belly and shrinks your hippocampus, the major memory center in your brain, which is why when you go through grief, I went through grief about 17 years ago, and I just couldn't remember anybody's name. And I knew what was happening to me. And so we're under more stress now because of the political divide and the societal unrest. And the news figured out if they make us mad and anxious, they sell more underwear, because the brain pays attention to negativity way before it pays attention to positivity. So, papers like the Washington Post, actually in their newsroom, they have, okay, which articles got the most hits? And if they're negative, they get the most hits. So we're being manipulated to be more negative, so these news organizations make more money. I mean, it's really horrifying when you think about it, but they're chronically, if people are not aware of this, people are just sort of pissed off, stressed, and anxious. And that's making us fat and
Wow.
very smart.
Are there things you can do? What are 3 things you can do to start to bring down those cortisol levels? Obviously, turn off the news and limit your consumption. But
right.
What are other ones?
Meditation, incredibly helpful. Prayer for people who do that. Hypnosis, I'm a huge fan. I've done it with my patients for the last 40 years. Having a regular relaxation process. And then ask yourself, is this worth killing brain cells for me? Whenever I listen to people arguing or really focused on, whatever the latest conspiracy theory is, I'm like, is that worth losing brain cells over?
No, it's not. I know you have a specific breathing pattern that is associated with a calmer mind. Can you teach it to us?
I love it so much. It's the 15-second breath. So if you're having a panic attack, this is going to fix it in 2 minutes or less. And what researchers discovered is you take twice as long to breathe out as you breathe in. It produces an automatic relaxation response in your body. So the pattern is this, and it's 4 seconds in.
Okay.
Hold it for 1.5 seconds. 8 seconds out. Hold it for 1.5 seconds.
Will you walk us through it?
So 4 seconds in. Hold it. 8 seconds out. Hold it out. And then repeat.
Well, thank you for giving us very tactical and doable strategies based on research that help us improve not only the physical and functioning aspect of our brains, but also tools and strategies to help us to start to reprogram the brain and the thinking patterns in it. I was able to get you an appointment with the world's leading expert on brain health. So I am here with you. I got my pen. I am ready to learn. Okay, what supplements do I need to take? What do I need to know about how to be a happier me?